Okay, good morning, everyone. So I started the recording. Today is March 13th, 2023. Today's discussion, the first part, the primarily research-based discussion, will be on research, the introduction to research methodology, on kind of how to do research, kind of a broad overview of how to set up a research, a study of some kind. We'll talk about the different types of research studies and kind of some of the generalizations, some of the overview of how to set things up. This isn't going to be like actually, they're talking about how to implement the aspects of the research study. It's going to, or even necessarily about how to get to conclusions and results and all that. That's going to be a later discussion that we'll talk about in the later parts of the semester. I will give a link to a couple of the things that we will. Good morning, Shirin. Let's see what was I saying. Oh, I'll give some links. I have an example study that I ran across a couple of years ago as an example of just not only in setting up our research, is acknowledging some of the limitations that we knowingly encounter, and we'll talk about that. I'll show that as an example. And what else was I going to say before we start? Oh yeah, so unfortunately we won't be meeting tomorrow. So I just realized that tomorrow is March 14th, and unfortunately, and it only works when you write dates in American style, but tomorrow is Pi Day. So if anybody is a big math fan, or maths as they say in the British English, then tomorrow's a big day. My son has already said he's going to wear a t-shirt, his Pi t-shirt for tomorrow. So anyway, yes, we're nerds in our family. All right, so let's talk about research methodology. So just a brief introduction. So what is the meaning of research? Because I'm sure many of you have run across in the past couple of years, right? Especially with different things like the pandemic and other things that have come up just from my own home country, and talking about things like voting machines that happened in 2020 with the election of 2020. And other things like that. I'm sure you've probably run across the phrase "do your own research," right? Make sure you do your own research, which is interesting, considering that a lot of times what they mean is, what a lot of times what I've run across at least is, and I am no let me see. I by no means do this perfectly, but I do know that some people, when they've said do your own research, what they mean is watch this YouTube video that I saw that exposes the truth or something like that. And I am not opposed to people watching YouTube videos, but when a lot of times when I've noticed people say do your own research, they don't actually mean research. What they mean is search, sure, but at the same time, research it needs to be very it needs to be designed well. It's not just let me go Google this topic real quick and see what Google has to say about it. It's not. It's definitely not just go to one website, even a good website like Wikipedia or something like that, and just see what they have to say about it. What research is really about is, again, it's about designing a plan of how you are going to try to discover truths about the universe, about the way things work, about our own little home here, Earth, and we do need to make sure that we understand what limits we put, because we need to define things well. Now, I think, let me see. Yeah, okay, so next week, we're a week delayed because I didn't get started on time this semester, but next week we'll talk about defining the research problem. And that's going to talk about how to make sure that we're not trying to come up with a broad problem. Like, you know, you might say, well, the problem is the world is a dangerous place. So we're gonna research why the world is a dangerous place and how to make it better. Well, that's too broad. That's not defined enough, right? And so what I'm getting at with that is part of our research methodology needs to be that we are setting up a research that accurately understands the problem we are trying to solve, or the problem that we're trying to, or the problem, or let's just use the word problem, but doesn't necessarily mean bad thing, and then I'll explain that in a moment. The problem we're trying to solve or the problem we're trying to understand. If you've ever heard the term problem statement, pretty much any time that a student, whether it be an undergraduate student for a senior design project or a graduate student trying to write a thesis, one of the first things I get them to do is to write a problem statement. Now, again, that doesn't mean that a problem statement doesn't mean that it has to be a bad thing. It could be simply something that I don't understand that I'm trying to understand better. Okay, and so yeah, it's a problem statement is simply kind of helping the writer or the researcher determine what exactly is it that I'm trying to do. Okay, and again, we will get deeper into that next week. Okay, all right. So let's see. So in common language, it means a search for knowledge, and this is why I said again that a lot of times when you hear people on social media and in news media and stuff say things like do your own research, this is what they mean. They mean just go search for knowledge, search for more knowledge about this topic that we're talking about. Now, you know, and again, usually when I say I'm not immune to this, what we mean by that is do your own research and come to my conclusion, right? And so we need to be cautious that when we say do your own research, what do we mean exactly? Because in a scientific meaning, research is scientific and, the word I was looking for, systematic, right? We have a plan of how we're going to do this. We're not just going out and Googling or reading every article that happens to have anything to do with the topic we want to learn more about. Right? We are being systematic in how we are approaching understanding the problem and developing any potential solutions. Okay, so we are investigating. So in a sense, we are being like Sherlock Holmes, right? We are, or what's another good detective story? Any of you guys watch those? Like, what is it? What, CSI or NCIS or any of those kinds of shows? Do they have any shows like that in Turkey? Yeah, my mom really likes CSI. My father-in-law, who died a number of years ago, actually he was a detective for the police force in America, and he actually was very frustrated with shows like CSI because they oftentimes showed technology that actually didn't exist. Like he said, like to really like match up a fingerprint, for example, it would take weeks of someone like actually having to go through and doing the things. He said with these shows always showed like in a matter of seconds, like we found a match, you know, and so he was somewhat frustrated sometimes with how unrealistic those shows were. But I get you, right? So I like CSI too, the few episodes I've seen. So, but the point I'm trying to get at with that is those guys, when they do, even as dramatized and maybe not true to life as those shows can be, they still show that what the researchers or the CSI agents or whatever, what they're doing is they are doing a systematic approach to how they're searching for knowledge, right? When they go to a crime scene, there's they put in a lot of barricades, and to make sure that normal, like average people don't come in and mess up the scene. They want to make sure that everything they get is exactly as it was when they found it. They wear gloves. There's a lot of care that is put into understanding how they're going to get the evidence for understanding it, right? And so in the same way, as we develop our research methodology for our problem that we're trying to solve, whatever it is, solve or understand, we need to make sure that we also put a lot of that care into how we do that, okay? All right. So when we talk about scientific research, it's not it's an academic activity. It is not a non-academic. I don't know what to call that, layman activity, right? So we need to make sure that we understand a technical understanding of what it is that we are doing. So we need to define and possibly redefine the problems, formulating hypothesis or hypotheses, right? Possible suggested solutions. We need to collect and organize and evaluate data. And these are all, again, systematically done, right? So we're not going to just be, well, today I think I'm going to collect this data, right? No, you make a plan in advance of how you're going to put these things together, right? Making deductions and reaching conclusions, and making sure that those conclusions are validated or supported by the facts that we have found, okay? And then testing the conclusions to figure out whether they fit the hypothesis. I remembered a video that I want to share. I'm gonna one of the things I like to do in this course is share different videos and different articles and things like that I run across that have to do with things that we talk about. And I remember one that I needed to share with you guys. All right. So the purposes of research, we want to understand some or get a new insight into some phenomena. All right. Now that could be big. It could be big like galaxies and worlds and stars and black holes. Like you guys know, a few years ago, we had the first pictures of the black hole that everyone was really excited about, right? Or it could be really small. It could be understanding microscopic, the subatomic particles, right, that make up the world and the universe that we live in. It wasn't that long ago that we thought that the smallest particle that it was in existence was the atom, right? We thought that, in fact, even the word atom, it means Latin. It means like single unit. In fact, so we talk about so like in like software engineering, for example, we talk about atomic tasks, meaning a task that can be done as a single unit, right? And so when we first discovered the atom, the belief was that that was the smallest particle in existence. And then it wasn't long after that that we discovered that no, actually, the atom is made up of smaller pieces. And by breaking open the atom into its smaller pieces, we were able to do great things like develop nuclear technology for powering, for generating electricity. We were also able to do some less than admirable things, such as creating explosive weapons that were quite destructive. But that was all due to finding out that the atom wasn't the smallest particle in existence. And so, yeah, so we can learn all kinds of things about different phenomena, big, small, and everything in between. We're also wanting to understand the characteristics, individual, situation, or group. So that's not necessarily directly technology based. It could be trying to understand a people group, such as Turkish people, American people, and also understanding that subsets of those groups exist. So, for example, I don't follow Turkish politics very much. I don't follow American politics as much as I used to, but I do know that American politics oftentimes researchers try to understand things like how white men vote, or how white women vote, or how Hispanic men and women, and they group them all into these small groups, understanding that individuals within that group behave distinctly. Like, they don't behave necessarily completely like the whole group, but also just trying to understand, how does this group as a whole generally move, or generally do things, right? We might want to determine how often something occurs. Like right now, I know for me, and I've not done a scientific research, but for the first time in my life over the past, let's see, for the first time in my life, about, what was it, 2-3 weeks ago, I have an earthquake app on my telephone now, on my smartphone, so that I can see when new earthquakes have happened in this country, right? I'm sure that's true for a number of people, that they're more aware of those things than maybe they used to be. And one of the things that, as I'm looking at that, and I know scientific researchers are doing as they study these things, is they want to know, how often does an earthquake of a certain magnitude occur, right? Because if we can know that, then we have a better chance of being able to predict when something might happen. Okay. And another objective could be to test a hypothesis or of a causal relationship. One of the things that you may have heard before is that it's not causality. It's correlation is not causation. Okay, so just because two things are sometimes correlated, they may go together in the graph, doesn't mean that one thing causes the other. Okay, a very common example of this that you might have heard before is ice cream sales and drownings. Okay, so that there seems to be, I guess you guys are looking at me this way, so there seems to be kind of this, as ice cream sales go up, the number of drownings, of people drowning, goes up as well. As ice cream sales go down, number of drownings kind of goes down as well. And so the joke here is that, therefore, we can conclude that ice cream is dangerous and causes drownings. Well, something inside of you should say, well, that's not right. Like, that's funny, that's a joke, but that's not right. And really, what's probably the underlying cause is that ice cream sales go up in warmer months like the summer. People swim more in the summer months, right? And as it gets warmer, and because people swim more, they probably get more incidences of drownings happen, right? And so that's really probably the better understanding of that. And so as we do our research, we need to make sure that we are being cautious not to assume that correlation automatically equals causation, right? That just because two things are correlated doesn't mean that one causes the other. All right. So, moving on, so some types of research, descriptive versus analytical. So descriptive is going to include things like surveys and fact-finding. It's going to be trying to understanding something. It's not necessarily going to be, in fact, it's usually not going to be a, what we might call an experiment, where you have a control and you introduce some variable into a variable group, and you test the differences between the outcomes. This is not what descriptive is. Descriptive is going to be more understanding the circumstances as it exists. Okay. Again, one of the things I want to point out is a lot of this material comes from a text that has more to do with social sciences, right? Not necessarily experimental sciences, but there is information about that in this text. So it's kind of like the general understanding of research here is what we're going for. Let's see. What you probably might have understood as research in the past is what we call kind of more analytical. right? So we analyze to make the evaluation of material. It can also generally, experimental research will usually come under the analytical. Applied, not all research has to be geared towards finding a solution to a problem, right? Applied will be that type of research where we're trying to solve the problem. Like, we recognize that there's a problem like world hunger, or again, earthquakes. Earthquakes cause lots of destruction and death. In my own home state in America, a big problem that we faced was hurricanes, these giant storms that would bring tornadoes and lots of rain and wind. Other people in other parts of the country experience tornadoes. Really only one state, California, experiences lots of earthquakes in America. But those are some examples of problems that we might want to find us, natural disaster type problems that we might want to find a solution to. And obviously, I don't think that in the immediate stopping earthquakes or stopping major storms is going to be an option for us, but we can find ways to mitigate, that's a big word, we can find ways to control how much destruction and devastation occurs as a result of these things, right? So that would be applied. We're trying to, so we might have, hopefully, right, what's happening as part of the recovery is also understanding how did some of these buildings fall, how did some of this, how did some of the destruction occur, and finding a solution for how we can prevent that in the future. Okay, but that would be applied research, is how are we going to solve a problem that exists. Fundamental research is mostly just concerned with understanding how something exists. So, you know, maybe stuff like, what's it called? Astronomy, right? Where we're understanding the heavenly bodies, the planets and stars and other things out there that exist in the universe, understanding how they interact, how gravitational forces interact. There's not really a problem to be understood there. There's not a problem rather to be solved there. It's not like we're trying to figure out how can we make stars do something different. Like that's not really what we're trying to do. We're just trying to understand how does the universe work. Okay, so that would be a fundamental type of research. Okay, you may have heard these terms before. I hope you have: quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative would be measuring a certain amount. So we're going to say, so I just got off a call yesterday with my brother-in-law, who's one of these coffee connoisseur. He really loves coffee, so he has like one of these little scales where he measures out exactly 44 grams of coffee bean and grinds that up, and then measures out exactly 200 something, he told me, I can't remember, 200 something milliliters of water, you know, and exactly what he wants to be. So that's quantitative. It's an amount. It's a measuring an exact amount, right? Qualitative research is more of like the quality of something, right? Quality or kind of something. So why did he do all that with the measuring? He wants his coffee to taste good, right? He wants to, so you might say he tastes his coffee and it has a certain amount of bitterness to it, or it has a certain amount of whatever flavor, whatever roasted flavor he has, like the hint of chocolate or something, right? That's qualitative, right? So you can't, like, you don't have a specific amount, like it's not a measured amount of taste. It's not a measured amount of chocolate flavor in his mouth, right? Now, the roaster would have quantitatively measured out how much of chocolate flavor to add to a specific amount of coffee bean, right? But as far as the consumer, as far as the taster, he's not necessarily going to have a specific amount that he can report of that. Oh, let's see. Question. Can applied research have both applied and fundamental research? Yeah. Okay. So I would say that generally, Budok, right? You go by Budok. I would say generally, uh, those two things would come under if you're writing papers for both of those, or trying to. You don't have to write a specific research paper for submission to a conference or journal. You could just be writing up a report for your own use. Like, I just want to understand this stuff better. I just want to understand earthquakes better, right? And hopefully you would be recording that somewhere, even if you don't publish it. All right. So I would say that's generally going to be two separate things, in the sense that, like, if you come initially trying to solve the earthquake problem, meaning, like I said, probably for people trying to solve the problem here, it's about building construction, right? And you might try to research, how does an earthquake affect the ground? So how would it affect the foundation of a building, right? Yeah, you can come at it initially with just saying, I just want to understand this stuff better. Right? I don't necessarily want to present a solution, but I just want to understand this stuff better. That would be one research that you'd kind of keep separate as its own thing. And then as you do that research, if that researcher or that team says, you know what, as we've studied this more, we're developing a theory, we're actually coming up with a theory that maybe could result in a solution, right? Then that would be a separate then paper. In fact, you see that quite frequently. Some papers you'll run across as you do research to understand the topic that you'll choose for your thesis, and for other papers you'll write. One of the things you'll run across is people who have written, there's a special name. I can't remember the special name, but it's basically, it's a summary of current or state-of-the-art research that's available. So people will publish papers, and the purpose of that paper is to kind of do the grunt work, to do the work of summarizing the research that's currently out there related to a topic. Okay, that they're not there to present a solution. They're not there to analyze the work that's done. They are simply about summarizing in one source, one location, the work that's already available out there. And then others may come in and say, okay, based on this, what potential solutions, what potential things can we do? That's Sharon, that's a good question too. Okay, so because now we're on the quantitative, qualitative. Do we want to measure the happiness level of a society? Well, it's kind of a mixture, I would think, depending on how we phrase that. So definitely, how happy are you is, in a sense, a qualitative question, right? Because if we ask a question like, what is your happiness? How happy do you feel right now? That's based on a person's feeling, which isn't necessarily a quantitative measurement. But I would say a lot of times when we ask those questions as part of our research study, we don't usually just say, tell me how happy you are, right? We say, what, on a scale of 1 to 5, or on a scale of 1 to 10, or we might have something like a list of statements and have them report, do they strongly disagree, neutral, agree, or strongly agree with the statement. And we might include as that statement, I'm happy right now, right? And how does that person feel? Do they strongly agree with that statement? Do they disagree with that statement? In which case, we've turned what is a qualitative thing, happiness, into a quantitative measurement. And what we would do with that data is it would have aspects of quantitative measurement there, right? such as quantitative measurements of the numbers like 1 to 5, and when we average it out, it would become a quantitative number. But yeah, it depends on how we do it, right? Because we could have something like a simple statement of yes, no, I feel happy right now, yes or no. And then that becomes very much a qualitative measurement, right? Or if we ask them to list their feelings right now, if we have, as part of a study, like let's say, again, I'm probably going to use earthquake stuff a lot in this semester, since it's been such a big part of our lives recently, and will be a big part of our lives for a while to come. But maybe if you were to ask earthquake victims and people who are assisting with the cleanup and aftermath and stuff like that, as part of this, like, list your feelings, right? And we might say, okay, then that becomes definitely qualitative, because we aren't asking them to give us a number on their happiness level. We're trying to see how many people in a certain subgroup list happy as one of the feelings that they list, right? I hope that makes sense. So quantitative, basically, if you see something that includes numbers or measurements of a quantity, that's going to be quantitative, even if it might represent a qualitative category. In your case, happiness, the example you gave. Okay, so the number 1 to 10, happiness level, is a quantitative, is an attempt at quantifying a qualitative measurement, if that makes sense. All right. Let's see. Okay, so we're running close on time before the break, so let me just kind of run through some of these slides here. Conceptual is is more abstract. Empirical would be based, it would be data based. So we can verify empirical research with observation or experiment. It's sometimes called an experimental type of research. Conceptual is more kind of abstract. We're not necessarily going to be able to reproduce the results. So again, we get a group of people together, we ask them their happiness level, something like that. We do it again with a different group, and we could get totally different results, right? Just because that other group might be totally different in some way. All right. We try to, in conceptual research and stuff, we try to avoid those types of things where different studies give vastly different results. We try to avoid that by making the group large enough, right? So one of the things we'll talk about in a later discussion is how to understand whether a group is large enough or not. So you don't want to do a study of 5 people to get their take on something and say, okay, this is representative, because that's going to probably not be enough people to really get a good understanding of what's going on in whatever it is you're studying. Some other types of research, I'll kind of let you, again, I'll let you guys read this on your own. I'm going to skip through that. This one too. Again, this is another slide on quantitative and qualitative of how to approach those two. Methods would be kind of the how we implement the methodology. All right, so research methods is referring to the techniques. Methodology is not just the research methods, but also the why. Why are we doing it the way we're doing it? If we want to do a study using questionnaires to our participants, why are we doing it that way? And that would be part of the methodology part of this. Okay, so methods are the how, methodology includes the why. Some methods that we might do is existing documents. We may do some research of historical documents. So if you're wanting to research ancient history, this area of the world is got a lot of ancient history. I mean, you can't really go anywhere. You can't really drive anywhere an hour without passing some ancient city that they're excavating, right? And so you could analyze historical records to understand how things were done or how things were understood in ancient history or in more recent history, but still history. Analysis of documents, right? For how to collect data, right? So again, a lot of these are related to non-specific. These aren't experiment-based, right? So non-participant direct observation. So we are directly observing, right? Directly observing the behavior of something or someone. Participant observation, meaning they know that they're being observed, right? Mass observation, so we may observe a group at once, right? Questionnaire, interviews with people. I would encourage you, I don't have this on the slides here, but there are pros and cons to each of these. So for example, even like the questionnaire versus the interview. Both of them are basically involving asking the person questions about their experience in the topic. The questionnaire, it allows for them to be able to respond in their own time. Also gives them a sense of anonymity, sense of being anonymous, so that they may be more honest with their responses if they don't have to put their name down on something. A personal interview, a con, a negative to this would be they might not feel as open to share truthfully and freely, because since there's a face-to-face aspect to it, they might feel like, oh, this person knows me, or at least even if they don't know me personally, it's harder for us sometimes to be completely open and honest face-to-face. But on the downside, sorry, on the upside to the personal interview is if a person does answer, the interviewer can pick up on what's called nonverbals to help understand the nature of the response being given. You know, it's the example I often give is, you know, if I were to write on a questionnaire, let's say I'm trying to analyze the OBS system, and I send a questionnaire out to all the users, and I say, what do you think of the class add drop feature on the OBS system? And the user writes back, it's fine, it works great. If they just write that, that's okay, I can just take that for what it is, right? But if I'm doing a personal interview and I say, what do you think about the OBS system add drop feature? And they say, oh, it's fine, it works great. Or if they say, that's fine, I mean, I guess it works great. You know, those two responses, same words, but definitely you picked up, as I hope you picked up, that those two responses were actually very different, even though the words were the same, right? And a personal interview allows the interviewer to pick up some of those nonverbals and be able to follow up with questions like, so I noticed you responded this way, so are there some problems with the OBS system that you would change? You know, that kind of thing. Okay. So some other methods of collection and data collection. Okay. We can also have a small group study in a lab or an experiment. All right. Again, this is about people and understanding people's behavior in these particular ones. We would also understand experiment-based control groups and variable groups would also be used in a lab environment. Okay. So our process of how we're going to do this, again, we're going to talk through a lot of these topics in the coming weeks. Right? The idea here being We understand the problem, we try to understand the problem. We do an extensive literature review, okay, literature survey, meaning we do a lot of looking at the documents, the papers, the journals, the conference papers that already exist related to our problem we are trying to understand. Okay, this is a big part of what your thesis is going to be about. Okay, is you need to show a couple of things. You need to show for your thesis that you understand the topic and the problem as it exists. Right, so you need to understand it thoroughly. An extensive literature review will show that you've done a lot of understanding of what exists already. Right. You also need to show that you've done enough work to show that, to your knowledge, what you are proposing, if you're proposing a solution to a problem, that your solution has not already been tried and proven successful or proven not successful. Okay. That can be harder than it looks sometimes, but especially in today's amount of research that's out there. Okay. So we need to make sure that, one, you understand the problem as it exists. Two, the solution you are proposing doesn't already exist or hasn't already been tried. And three, that the solution you're trying to propose, it's valid. Like there's a valid need for it, right? So if after doing a literature survey, if there are not nearly enough papers and articles and citations that already exist for what you're trying to do or trying to understand, you may have refined your problem down too small, and therefore it might be it might not be well defined yet. Okay, so you may have tried to narrow your problem a little too small. It could be just that not enough people have done anything to study the problem as it exists, which is possible. But you'll have to determine that. And if your literature review seems to be lacking in its number of citations, you'll need to show why. Right? You'll need to show why there aren't enough related works to what you're doing. Okay. Developing the hypothesis, I think I said that's next week, so we'll talk about that, about how to do that. Preparing the research design, determining sample design, collecting data, execution, analysis of the data, testing the hypothesis, and then finally getting to the generalizations, interpreting the results, and presentation of getting the report presented and written. This whole thing is if you look at it visually, it looks like this, right? And again, there's a feedback loop here. There's actually a couple of feedback loops here, right? Where our feed forward and a feedback, right? Is sometimes after you analyze the data, you might need to get more data. Okay, you may have a situation where, you know, I'm not getting a really good analysis done, right? Or after you interpret the results, right? You might say, you know what? We didn't get enough. We didn't study enough individuals. We didn't study. We didn't run this experiment, this simulation, enough times to really understand it well. Okay. Also, once we get to the interpret and report, we may need to go back and redefine the problem itself, even because we may end up with a non-solution. Okay. As we are preparing the research methodology and how we're going to execute our results, right? One of the things that, let me pull up the document I was telling you I was going to show you guys. So this was, and I'm going to run a little bit over, but then we'll just maybe end up having a lesser, the ethics discussion may go a little bit less. We'll see how it works out. Okay, so this was an article that was sent to me by a friend a number of years ago. Now, I like this article for a couple of different reasons, but one of the things was the guy that sent this to me basically made the statement as part of it to say, hey, look, it's been proven through this controlled trial, randomized controlled trial, that mask wearing has no effect and we shouldn't be wearing masks at all. Okay. There are problems with that. If you read, I'll share this link with you to show you. But the conclusion to this article actually says the opposite, not the opposite. The conclusion to this article says we don't know, is really what the article says. But because there was not a clearly shown correlation and a clearly shown causal relationship between mask wearing and prevention of a mask wearer getting infected with the disease, then basically they were saying we can't make any really great conclusions here. And that is one of the reasons I like this article, is they say that. They say that what we discovered is we don't know, right? And it's okay for us to say that, right? It's okay for us to get to the end of a study and say, you know what? We don't know. We don't know if this has a correlation or not. We need to study this more, okay? So, but specifically what I want to point out today, and I may come back to this article again in the future for some of those other points that I'm saying, but specifically what I want to talk about is some of the limitations of things that we have to report if we're going to be completely honest in our reporting on these tests, okay? So they did tell us inconclusive results. That's going to be something I'll point out when we talk about results reporting, okay? Missing data, but specifically this patient reporting findings, okay? Now, there's a reason we need to put that in there as a limitation, is because what this is saying is some of the aspects of the results are influenced by the honesty or lack thereof, but the honesty of the patients that we were testing, right? So what happened here is what they decided to do was have the participants use at-home tests for whether or not they were COVID positive or negative, rather than having them come in to the lab however so often and get officially tested by like a PCR test or something like that. Okay, so one of the things that they're saying is our results, well, our data, and therefore our results, are limited by the honesty and not even just the honesty, but the ability, I should say that, maybe not the honesty, but the ability of our participants to be able to accurately take the test and accurately report the results of those tests, right? You know, it's like, I mean, let's say that what the methods, let's say that the part of the methods here was we want our patients to take weekly COVID tests, weekly at-home COVID tests. And let's say the patients, they're busy, they have work, they have families and all this stuff, and they ended up taking the test once every 2 weeks, right, instead of once every week. Well, that could affect the ability of the researchers to really feel like they got good data and therefore have good valid results based on those data. Okay, so those are things, again, there's nothing wrong with doing the methodology this way. They're doing the methods this way. But when we report, we need to make sure we keep track of things like that, patient reporting findings, this is also variable adherence, meaning not all participants adhered to the requirements the same way. We need to acknowledge that those things affect our ability to get good results. Okay, so again, those are the types of things that we decide as part of the methodology, right? So I'm sure that these researchers, when they were designing the methodology, when they were designing the methods, Remember, the methods are the how, the methodology is the how and the why, right? And so as they were designing the methods for how to conduct this study, I'm sure the question of should we have participants come in every week or every so often should we have them come in to get officially tested, or should we just trust them to do the test at home? That discussion happened. For whatever reason, these researchers decided that, well, what we'll do is we'll have them do at-home tests. All right. And I don't remember right off the top of my head, but it may say in the text of the article the reason for why they chose that. Okay, so as we are developing our methodology, as we are deciding what methods to use and how to do them, one of the things that we need to do is record what we decided, record the why as well, because people will ask, well, why did you do it this way? So for anyone in this chat that has ever given a presentation at a conference or given a presentation on a research paper in a class, hopefully you were asked why. Why did you do it this way? Why did you not do it this other way? That kind of thing. Okay, so we need to record not only the how, but also the why, so that we can answer those questions when they come up. Okay. All right. Are there any questions before we take our break and then come back for the second discussion? Or any comments? Doesn't have to be a question, it could be a comment too. All right, so let's do this. Let's take a break. I'll stop the recording.